What's happening, y'all? It's your boy Muga Magnificent, and I'm back with another review. And today we're talking about Megalobox Season 2. Wow. It's been a long time coming. Megalobox Season 2 has probably been out for a while now. And the fact that I'm doing a review for it, I think should be pretty indicative of the quality of this series. I watched Season 1 some time back and I loved it. The hip hop influences, the way that the series took this futuristic, slightly apocalyptic vibe, desperado type Western vibe, and then applied these hip hop elements to it and to this process of this young underground boxer trying to make it. And it felt like a complete story. You see Joe go from underground boxer to gearless Joe champion. You see Pops go from the regular coach to extolled legendary coach. It seems like the story has been told. But Megalobox Season 2 is here to tell you that legends have futures too. And wow, wow, what a series. I could not have imagined that this series could go in the direction that it went. I I took the season 2 very slow. It was hard to watch at first. It was hard to get through each progressive episode cuz it was rough. It starts off and Joe is the best way to describe it is the guy is clearly in trouble. He's not he's got emotional turmoil. He's got this dirty beard. He's running around place to place looking for fights with people who are not at the level that he had reached at the end of the Megalonia tournament. So you're asking yourself, what are they doing with this series and why have they brought Joe here? And that doesn't become clear until the season finishes. And that is something that is to its detriment but its greatest benefit, because most people aren't going to get Megalobox season 2, but the people that stay to finish it and watch it and see what happens to these characters and the story that they're telling, they're going to wildly appreciate this series. This series is phenomenal. I think that the transition from season 1 to season 2 has given us a progression of an anime that is so unique and so poignant to these characters. So let's start off with a general recap of season 2 and how season 2 goes so that we can understand better how it is that this series is so masterfully done. So I've already mentioned that Joe starts off this series as a nomad who is essentially just running around from place to place looking for fights, and you're wondering what this man is doing. Come to find out, Joe has run away. Essentially, he's on these shoddy painkillers. He's worse than he's ever been. He seems to be fighting these fights with people who are wildly below his level and throwing fights, winning fights, whatever. It's all just empty. Empty. It's just Joe operating, and there's none of the drive, none of the desire, none of the determination that defined his character in the first season. And it isn't until you meet Chief. It isn't until you meet Chief that this show opens and you see and understand what needed to happen to Joe. Cuz this show operates as long-form grief counseling. That's how I view it. It's a way way to sort through the emotions of loss and to process it and learn how to look towards a future when you've lost something so major from your past. And Joe, when he meets Chief, Chief is simply somebody he's fighting, right? He's somebody that he met in the ring. At least that's how I remember it being presented. And when he fights Chief, he sees Chief's talent and he goes for it, and Chief falls because Chief was just fighting for some pieces of garbage who were looking to throw fights, those types of match fixers. And Chief and Joe, uh, they eventually start this relationship and become friends, right? And what Chief gives to Joe is something to hold on to, because Joe is essentially somebody who feels like he's lost the gearless Joe persona has become an anchor. It's become an anchor on his life because he can't move on from the life that he had won and earned and all of these things. So through these interactions with Chief, he eventually decides to become Chief second. And by deciding to become Chief second, by deciding to invest in Chief's dream and to put the effort forward for him, Joe was able to find in himself not only the power to try and get to shake off these painkillers, but the power to move forward. So when Joe finally helps Chief, eventually him and Chief create this relationship where they work hard. Chief now wants to participate in the Megalonia tournament because where Chief lives, which I don't think that it can be understated, that they seem to be Mexican refugee analogs, right? There are these people who have been displaced from where they were. They came to wherever the country that Joe lives in to look for a better life. And that society, the little RV town that they had created, their trailer park, was going to get taken over by this entity, by this person who just wanted to use it to make something commercial, as with all of these capitalists, if you will. And Chief enters the tournament in order to win the money to buy the trailer park, and Joe operates as a second. And through this interaction, Joe is able to find himself. He's able to find the drive again, the motivation again. And that was so important. So important because we've seen so many unnecessary sequels. So many unnecessary sequels where characters come back and there's no real development, or the story gives them development that doesn't make sense. But as much as the time skip is jarring when you first start the series, who Joe is now after what they explained to you happened, after the tragedies that he's experienced, after the life that he lived after Megalonia, it makes sense. So he goes through this process with Chief, and he's gradually they're gradually going through these fights, and he's operating as the second, helping him gradually getting his drive back, and they win. They win the tournament, and Joe gets that drive that Chief recognizes, and Chief recognizes that he has that drive in him, and he says, "You got to go back to it. You got to get back to it, man." And then from the process, from the fighting, Chief eventually succumbs. Now, when Chief succumbs to his injuries, this was very important because not only did it show Joe the eventual possible result of the life that he's living, but by Chief passing away, it gave Joe the need to rectify his relationships. The character of Chief is so well done because Chief's story is that he's a refugee who had a wife and son. He lost his wife, and when he lost his wife, it was just him and his son. And the gear that he wears is the way that he connects with his son. So in a complete contrast to Joe, a character who goes into the ring without a gear, and that's how he connects with his family, Sachio, Pops, the kids, Aragaki, all of those characters. But for Chief, it was different. For Chief, he lost his son, and when he loses his son, the gear is the way that he connects with his son. So when he enters the ring, it never feels like he's alone. So it's a very different way of operating than Joe, who today, or the Joe from the beginning of season 2, is using a gear to get away from the gearless Joe persona because he doesn't feel like he has ownership over the persona. So many people worked into it that it's not his alone. So when Chief passes, one, it hurt so bad because he was such a cool character. But it gave Joe the drive to go home and to try and reconcile. And that isn't easy. That isn't easy. He goes through it. All the kids are different. Sachio, Banjiri, Oicho, they've progressed. Oicho is now working for the mechanic. Banjiri has his own restaurant. Sachio, the good engineering kid, is now a boxer in the vein of Joe. So you can see the clear indications that sure some of them are growing, but the pains that were left with them by Joe leaving are apparent and raw. They don't want anything to do with Joe when he comes back. His grand, magnificent return ends into nobody wants to see him. Sachio wants him to go. And there's so many instances of Sachio just punching Joe and Joe allowing it. Come to find out, Sachio is the one who told Joe to leave. So it wasn't Joe abandoning all of them. He took that upon himself and left because he felt like he wasn't there for them when they needed it. So the story you eventually come to find out once Joe comes back is that Pops Pops got very sick. And when Pops got sick, it strained everything. And Joe could not see himself beyond the dream. All he could see was boxing. He had been so far removed from the boxing when Pops got sick. He challenged Yuri, and Sachio's the biggest relationship that he has to heal. Because back to the point that I was making before I went on a tangent, is when Pops died, it's it or when Pops was dying even, and they recognized the eventuality of him not being present for them anymore, him not guiding them, him not helping them. When they all realized this, when Joe in particular realized this, it left him lost. All Joe knew was boxing. So he takes this fight with Liu, who has this wild expectation and understanding of Joe as a legend. And the entire reason that Liu even has become a boxer was because of Joe and the fight that he witnessed between Joe and Yuri. This fight was the fight of the ages in this series. It was that important. And Joe gets wrecked. He makes a promise to Pops that winning the fight is what's going to allow him to get better, so on and so forth. And in a figurative way, in a literal way, the L that Joe takes is what eventually breaks him. He goes to the fight, and Pops is getting sicker. He even gets the notification that he's getting sicker from Sachio. And Sachio simply can't accept that Joe can't let the fight go long enough to take care of Pops. He feels like it's far more important that he's there for Pops than that he chases his dream. But the thing is, this whole series is about understanding why Joe is that way and how he can find a way beyond that self. So we find out this info about Pops, about how Pops went out and how it affected the crew, why Joe left, why Sachio is the way that Sachio is today, and so on. What is so cathartic about this series is that Joe works hard for every emotional step. He works hard to get every bit of time that he can out of these kids because he knows he regrets so badly what he did. But at the same time, he's Joe, and they know that he's Joe. So they know that boxing for him is not it's not a game. It is life for him. So Joe decides to in the eventuality of the series, in an effort to save Team Nowhere and to reinvigorate this family. Joe is putting every effort forward. And that's about, let's say, the mid part of the series. Joe eventually has a little sparring session with Liu, where Liu gets a vibe for Gearless Joe, and as he gets that vibe for Gearless Joe, he's even more energized to fight him. There's a new character that I have not mentioned, Mac Rosario. Mac Rosario is a problem. Mac Rosario is, given how complex and deep Chief is, Mac Rosario probably matches or is even more complex and deeper than Joe or than Chief. Mac Rosario, this show is a lot of contrast, a lot of contrast, because Chief and Mac are alarmingly similar. They both have the same culture, and they're both immigrants from that same place. So there's a certain similarity to the two of them. Mac Rosario is somebody who rose through the rankings and was about to fight Liu, the person who beat Joe in Megalonia went way back. And when Mac Rosario was essentially a straight-laced a cop who, in an episode of heroism, became paralyzed. And from that paralysis, this corporation took advantage of him, gave him the ability to get back to get back into megaloboxing, which was a hobby for him, but essentially was taking advantage of him. And this guy is a family man. He is, when you watch his story of how he met his wife, how he had his son, the reason why his wife took the money and the transplant and the contract from Sakuma in order to save their son and to keep quiet about the dangers of the chip that they were using to give Mac his abilities back. Mac, man, this show has some of the coolest characters I've ever seen. The most developed and real feeling characters I've ever seen. Because Mac has Mac is a great fighter and very talented. But it seems that he has this quality about his fighting called Mac time that allows him to come back from a knockout and win the fight. It's like it's a trademark that he has. Come to find out that that's a side effect of the chip, and it's actually a negative effect that is affecting his real life. That the corporation kept from him and is the reason for the contract that his wife signed. They knew the data. They've been hiding the data. They've been going about it. When Mac finds out, this is a critical moment, right? Because this shows the character of a person. You find out that the thing that you're using is essentially giving you an ability beyond your regular ability. One, and it's dangerous to your family. Mac does everything in his power to do it right. He goes to the Shirato Corporation, the partners of from the first season who are working with the Sakuma Corporation this season to make this chip that allows people. Once the president of that corporation finds out, she's all above ground. She does everything in her power to fix the situation. She's not as critical of a character to the season as the boxers are. But when Mac goes and makes this plan to fight, he does it in a way where he can preserve that integrity that he has because he doesn't want to. He finds out that this Mac time is essentially an erratic state from the chip, so he want still that legendary image of Gearless Joe is clear in his mind. So he has to have this fight with Joe, and he wants it to be his last fight. No, similar to Joe, right? And they're able to have this critical fight. They have this fight specifically because of their love of boxing. But because they're at the end of their careers, they've surrounded themselves with people who they are ready, who they know they can trust to help them find the future. For Mac, it's his wife and his son. For Joe, it's Sachio, the family, Arogaki, and Team Nowhere. And it's this interaction between Joe and Mac. It may seem like it's just the fight, right? But everything that led Joe to that arena, him him traveling, becoming a nomad, coming back, trying to heal his emotional wounds, working hard, getting back into boxing, having that sparring match with Liu, and then finally getting that exhibition match with Mac, the new champion, who because of Mac time breaks Liu, breaks that kid. So kind of a cheat, right? But at the same time, also him getting a little bit overconfident. That aside, this fight between Mac and Joe is it's the culmination of the series. It's the culmination of both seasons. It's the final fight that allows these career boxers who know nothing more. They they live for this. Joe was even fighting with no regard for his life. but they found their futures. They found their futures. That's what this series is about. It's about these people who are lost in the past. They're slaves to it even. But they find somehow the value in the people around them that allows them to go forward through all the turmoil, through all the tragedy, through all the loss. They're able to find that way forward. And it's for that reason that this series is a masterpiece. I don't think that I can go the route of giving my typical number grade to this, because I've sat with this series and I thought about how I wanted to come about this, and I really think that that season 2 is a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. It's grief counseling and catharsis all in one. It's a heavy series that, if you go all the way through, is going to give you a fantastic feeling. And that's how I feel. Movie Magnificent, y'all. It's 30 minutes of a video. I was really trying to just pop in here and give you guys a 10-minute rundown and turn it into something else. I appreciate you guys for coming by. Come back. More content coming. Probably a Jedi Fallen Order review. And we're steadily going through Ranking of Kings, so good stuff coming there. But I'm going to be back. Love you guys. Peace and stay up.